There are also scholarly connections from texts that were from various different authors. For example, uh, Mortensen talked about Gamergate and some of the anonymous posting that was going on. And one of this quote was interesting to me, talking about the echo chambers um, and silencing opposing voices. This is something I felt like was trying to be done to me by a very active poster in my thread about using fantasy football in math instruction. Um, and it just was really important to just kind of understanding that this is something that's out there in these types of discussion forums, and just doing my best to reach out to that person and seeing what I could do to bring them on board. Even though I don't know if I got that member on board, but it did calm the problem. Another piece, this was from the Stevens and All article. This is talking about transfer. And when I'm thinking about transfer of arithmetic skills, fantasy football is that active doing of those arithmetic skills when taking raw data and then turning it into a score, and using those skills. And so it's that active use and not just thinking it's going to be a automatic process that happens. And then two quotes from Jenkins and all. Talking about simulations. I really see that fantasy football is a simulation for looking at data and making predictions. That's an important skill for my students to learn, and so I think fantasy football is a good excuse me, a good simulation for that. And then in the second quote, talking about how it's flexible because it can be customizing those models. I can really use whatever kind of coefficients to simulate the different arithmetics that I want my students to be practicing, and so it does give a lot of flexibility in keeping engaging and active learning for my students. And like I'd said, I had great success with my list or my topic that I started in the forum. I got tons of resources from other members. Like I said, it was mostly positive, and so I got these. Here's some examples, some great resources I got. This is a worksheet for practicing different different arithmetic to score. So these would be examples of ways people had scored during a football game, and then practicing taking that data and turning them into points. Here's an interview with an author of a fantasy football curriculum that there were some interesting pieces in, and definitely can be used if I want to talk to an administrator or a parent about why I'm going in this direction. Here's another article from ESPN.com. And again, this is also highlighting educators that have used fantasy football in their classes and their successes. And then an interesting video talking, and then that actually shows students in a classroom as they are learning with fantasy football. So here's a final message.
Well, thank you for watching my presentation about fantasy football and my participation in the FF Today Affinity Space. I've been really happy with my membership there. I've learned a lot. I've had some fun, and it's just going to be a great tool for me going forward as playing fantasy football. The Fantasy Football League is coming up. The NFL draft's in the next week, so I'm looking forward to taking knowledge that I've learned from the affinity space and applying that to my playing. And then I'm just going to be ready to win another championship. As for my teaching practice and going forward with this affinity space, I definitely want to continue to communicate about what I've done or what I'm going to do with teaching fantasy football for math, but I probably am not going to want to encourage my students to join the FF Today affinity space. I don't think the moderation is protected enough from trolls or maybe even cyberbullying for younger students. But I think that there are moderated discussion forums that would work well for students, maybe in Edmodo, that could be developed and moderated as my class is working on, or as my students are working on their fantasy football games. So I do think there's a future, and I definitely think my students would benefit from the communication in an infinity space and learning from each other, but just making sure it's moderated for their protection.
And if you're interested in any of the resources or the texts that I spoke about in this presentation, please follow the link for this Google slide presentation on my YouTube channel. And you can connect with the slideshow and follow all the links.